Welcome to my creative world. I hope you enjoyed my Abandoned Tower survival series. If you haven't watched it all yet, I recommend checking it out by clicking the card in the top right or with the link in the description. Finished? Great! If you haven't figured it out yet, I created the Abandoned Tower and everything in it using a data pack, and today I want to show you how I did it. After coming up with the idea and getting the broad strokes on paper, I knew that the first and most important step was going to be making the Arcane pedestals. They were going to be front and center for the whole series, and so they needed to look good and work well, getting the viewer excited about how it could work and what would be unlocked next. After making the model in Blockbench, I wrote a command to give me a spawn egg for each color of pedestal that I wanted. These spawn eggs all summon a marker entity, which then summons an item display entity to render the custom model. It also sets the block as a barrier block, so it can be solid, but won't visibly collide with the model. There's also an interaction entity, which is the hitbox you see here, and that's what the player clicks on to try to unlock it. For my convenience, I made it so they can be easily rotated with a debug stick and removed with a barrier block, just in case I needed to mess with them during the next step, building the tower. I started off by building the entire tower, including all of the main large additions. You'll notice that I didn't fill in rooms like the bedroom, and there are a few other features missing like the brewing stand on the Nether Portal Island. Since I knew these would be smaller pieces, I planned to build those during the next step, putting all the pieces in structure blocks. This involved meticulous dissection of the tower, and in some cases modifying or rebuilding parts so that they can all be saved in structure files that would then be loaded by the Arcane pedestals. For convenience, I even did this for smaller structures, like the armor stand that has the mysterious armor on it. By the way, if you want to play with the Abandoned Tower data pack yourself, you can download it by joining my Patreon. I made it primarily for this YouTube series, so it may still have some bugs, but as a reward for my Wizard tier patrons and higher, you can download and enjoy it in your own world. Link for that is in the description. If you're curious why some of these structures are at an odd rotation, don't worry. I did this to ensure that I could save all the structures and have them loaded at a consistent rotation for when the Abandoned Tower generates facing the same direction. Because it generates naturally, it can be rotated along with all the Arcane pedestals, so during the next step, I had to include coordinates for all possible rotations of these pieces, which is a bit tedious but not very hard. This is also when I built all the bedroom pieces, including the Kaleidoscope. The Kaleidoscope was created similarly to the Arcane pedestals. It's an item display combined with a barrier block, but with no interaction entity so that you can place blocks in the glass case, which is of course just part of the item display. When it detects a block that I defined could be used for an Arcane pedestal, except for a Wither Skeleton skull, it cycles through all those possible blocks and then stops after a few seconds. It also summons an interaction entity over that block so that you can't break it before it's finished. Once I got all that working, the Abandoned Tower was able to be fully unlocked. The next step was to implement the enchanted Spyglass behavior. The Spyglass itself is totally normal, and in fact, I made the teleportation able to work with any old Spyglass. The magic is actually all around the tower and islands. If I turn on hitboxes, you can see a bunch of these invisible entities, which are interaction entities. I made an advancement that triggers when you look at an interaction entity using a Spyglass, which then runs a function to teleport you to the marker entity that's associated with it, which serves as the destination for the teleport. This might have been my favorite part of the project, and I'm really happy with how it turned out, so you'll have to let me know what you guys thought. Finally, it was time to work on the boss. I love making boss fights, and after overhauling the bosses in Town, I had a pretty good system down for making really engaging and exciting battles that keep the player on their toes. The Ancient Lich model was made in Blockbench using a plugin called Animated Java. It basically allows you to create and animate models in much the same way that Bedrock mobs can be, but then exports those models and animations to a resource pack and data pack that you can use to spawn the mob in-game as a bunch of item displays riding each other. Normally you would then make these item displays ride or follow a mob to inherit some of its AI, as well as to more easily manage a hitbox and health. But I decided to just use an interaction entity and handle all the AI, damage, and health myself, and I'm really glad that I did because it was a great learning experience. The boss has two main stages, seeking and attacking. Most of the time it is seeking, or following the player. It's constantly running a damage command in front of itself to do some minor melee damage if you let it get too close. During this time, you can hit it, and doing so will cause it to turn red and play a short damage animation, just like a real mob. Every so often, it will decide to change to the attacking state. The time between attacks is variable. Basically, anytime between 1.5 to 5 seconds, it has a small chance to try to begin an attack charge animation. While it's above half health, it can only select between 3 attacks, which all have a different length of time that they charge for and or take to fully complete. You can also damage it while it's charging or attacking, but while it'll still turn red, it won't play the damage animation, so that doesn't interrupt its charging animation. The skeleton skull projectiles were also fun to make, because I was able to borrow a lot of their code from the last dragon's amethyst projectiles in Dragonkind Evolved. Fun fact, when I made the death ray attack, I accidentally made it able to heal itself above its maximum health, so during testing he was practically impossible to kill. Thankfully I was able to squash that bug easily. I also made it so he won't summon more zombie minions if he already had some, so they could be a nuisance rather than a serious threat. When the Ancient Lich is below half health, he gains 2 more attacks, and has a higher chance of using them than the previous 3. I didn't exactly mean for them to both be so functionally similar, but I think it still worked well. The Darkness attack teleports it to a semi-random location on the island, and the Curse attack always teleports it to the middle. Before we get to the endgame stuff, let's talk about the laboratory. This was actually a last-minute addition that I made in the middle of the series, when I realized I needed to have a backup plan just in case there wasn't another fortress near my nether portal, since a Wither Skeleton Skull was required to release the Ancient Lich. So, I made it provide 2 machines that could summon blazes and Wither Skeletons that could be farmed, but not very efficiently. I didn't exactly mean for the Wither Skeleton Skulls to be so common, and in hindsight, I probably would have made it so only 1 Wither Skeleton Skull could be obtained from each laboratory. I also tried really hard to make the laboratory spawn directly connecting to the abandoned towers in the overworld, which is why it has a lit portal inside. But unfortunately, due to the nether being 8 times smaller than the overworld, it just wasn't going to be possible. Maybe with some extreme time investment into mathematics or a better understanding of the structure generation code, it could be done, but the tools we have for custom structure generation right now are just a little too limited for that degree of control. Lastly, let's look at the rewards for defeating the Ancient Lich. Initially, it was just going to be the Restored Island, featuring the magic pond that could restore the durabilities of items in your hand. It can only do this for 10 consecutive seconds before needing to wait 24 hours to recharge, which I thought was pretty cool in itself. Towards the end of developing the project though, before I started recording, I realized I wanted the Ancient Lich to drop an item as well. So I made the Lich's Staff to give the pond a little more meaning. It's very powerful, giving you 10 extra hearts and a strong ranged attack, but it runs out of durability just by holding it, necessitating using the pond to restore it every so often. I also gave it the same Curse of Deterioration that I give to all the items in Dragonkind Evolved, so that it can't have mending applied to it. The Lich's Staff's ranged attack is supposed to make the killed mobs not drop loot, which is alluded to in the laboratory's lore book. But I think I messed it up slightly, because if it kills the mobs in 1 hit, they can still drop their loot. Still, it only does 10 damage per hit, so if you use it on anything stronger than like a cow, then this feature works as intended. Once again, if you want to play with the Abandoned Tower data pack yourself, you can join my Patreon with the link in the description. I hope you enjoyed the Abandoned Tower Survival series. Don't forget to subscribe so you can follow along for my next series. Thanks for watching!